My family abandoned me for 5 years for marrying a poor man, but when my millionaire sister went bankrupt because of her scammer husband, they came back begging for my money and I left them speechless. I'm 31 years old. I work at a consulting firm where I'm doing pretty well, actually. And my husband Samuel has his own industrial products distribution company that's grown a ton over the past few years. And I need to tell this story because 2 weeks ago my mother called me after 5 years of not speaking to me, 5 complete years. And the reason she called was so ridiculous and predictable that I still can't believe it. But I guess I should start from the beginning, so all of this makes sense. Because the truth is, my family was always a disaster disguised as perfection. I grew up in one of those families that from the outside look like the complete American dream. You know, huge house in a gated community, German cars in the driveway, vacations in Europe every summer, that kind of thing. My father, Douglas, had a pretty successful construction company, and my mother, Gloria, well, my mother basically dedicated herself to spending the money my father made and making sure everyone knew exactly how much we had. I have a younger sister, Cassandra, who's 4 years younger than me, and since we were kids, we were completely different. Like oil and water doesn't even begin to describe how different we were. I was always more quiet. I liked reading. I preferred spending time with the 2 or 3 close friends I had, instead of going to those huge parties where everyone competed to see who had the most expensive purse or the boyfriend with the flashiest car. Cassandra, on the other hand, was exactly like my mother, obsessed with appearances, with brands, with always being surrounded by people she considered important. My mother, Gloria, has this background story that she hates being mentioned, but that explains so much, and it's that she didn't grow up with money, not at all. She grew up in a small town. Her family was normal working class. Her father was a mechanic, I think, and she always resented that. She always hated not having the things other girls had. She met my father when he was just starting his business, both around 25, and she basically latched onto him because she saw the opportunity to have the life she always wanted. It's not that they didn't love each other, I guess, but there was a transactional element to their relationship that was always kind of obvious. And when my father started making real money, when I was like 6 or 7, my mother transformed into this super exaggerated version of a high society woman, like more Catholic than the Pope. You know what I mean? Because she hadn't been born into that world, she tried twice as hard to prove she belonged there. Cassandra absorbed all of that like a sponge. From when she was little, she was the spoiled child, my mother's princess, and my mother encouraged her in everything. Did Cassandra want a $2,000 purse at 16? She got it. Did she want a BMW as soon as she turned 18? There it was with a giant red bow on the front. I watched all of that and honestly, embarrassed me. It's not that I didn't enjoy having money. Obviously I did. But there was something about the way my mother and my sister flaunted it that seemed vulgar to me. And I use that word because it's exactly the one my mother hated being called the most, which has its irony. When I started college, I studied business administration. Not because I was particularly passionate about it, but because it was practical and what my father expected. Cassandra eventually went to a super expensive private university, where she basically paid for the degree because she spent more time partying than in class. During my college years, I started separating more from my family. Not dramatically. I just started building my own life, my own circles of friends that had nothing to do with my parents' world. And it was in my last year of college, like 9 years ago now, that I met Samuel. I met Samuel in the most random way possible. I was at a coffee shop grading some final papers, and he arrived with a group of colleagues from his work. There were like 5 guys, all with ties and shirts, who looked tired after a long day, and they were talking about an account they had just closed or something like that. Samuel ordered a coffee, turned around, and literally ran into me and spilled my coffee all over my papers. He felt so bad. He apologized like 20 times, offered to pay to clean my things, buy me another coffee, whatever. He was genuinely sweet in the way he apologized. It wasn't an act. We ended up talking for like 2 hours after his friends left. He told me he worked in sales for an industrial equipment distributor, that he had grown up in a lower middle-class neighborhood, that he had paid for his college working nights at a warehouse, basically his whole story. And what caught my attention was that when I asked him what I did, and I told him about my studies, he didn't ask where my family was from or what my parents did, which literally every guy I had met before did in the first 5 minutes. We started dating casually at first, but it got serious pretty quickly because it was so easy being with him, so relaxed. Samuel was hardworking, ambitious, he had goals, but he wasn't obsessive about money or status. He wanted to have a good life. Sure, But he defined good life as having a happy family, a job he liked, being able to travel once in a while, not like buying a Rolex or living in the right zip code. We dated for like 6 months before I took him to meet my family, and I had my doubts, honestly, because I knew exactly how my mother was going to react. The first family dinner with Samuel was exactly the disaster I imagined, but multiplied by 10. My mother was cold from the moment she saw him. She barely shook his hand. My father at least pretended to be polite. He asked him questions about his work, though you could tell he was evaluating him like he was a potential investment. Cassandra, who was like 20 at the time, basically ignored him a whole time and spent dinner talking about some guy she was getting to know who was the son of some important businessman or whatever. After Samuel left that night, my mother sat me down in the living room and said, "Isabella, we need to talk," and basically gave me a half-hour speech about how I was wasting my potential, how I could get someone much better, someone from our social class, someone who could give me the kind of life I was used to. I told her that Samuel made me happy, that was what mattered, and she literally told me that love doesn't pay the bills, that I was very naive, that when the novelty wore off, I was going to regret it. But I stayed with Samuel because it was what I wanted. It was what truly made me happy. For the next 2 years, my mother tried to sabotage our relationship in every possible way. She introduced me to guys at every family event, sons of her friends, my father's partners, guys who drove Mercedes and had apartments in the most expensive part of the city. It got to the point where she invited one of these guys to Christmas dinner without telling me, like an ambush. And when I exploded and told her it was unacceptable, she accused me of being dramatic and ungrateful. My father in all this was more passive. He wasn't as against Samuel as my mother, but he didn't defend me either. He basically let my mother do whatever she wanted and stayed on the sidelines. Samuel endured all of this with incredible patience. He never pressured me to choose between him and my family. He never spoke badly of them, even though he had every reason in the world to do so. And like 3 years into dating, about 6 years ago now, he proposed to me. It was super simple, nothing ostentatious. We went to a cabin in the mountains one weekend, and he proposed there, with a ring I know cost him several months of savings, but that was perfect. It was exactly what I would have chosen. I said yes, obviously. I was super happy. And when I told my parents, I thought that maybe it was time for them to accept reality and be happy for me. A huge mistake on my part. My mother exploded. And when I say exploded, I mean she screamed, cried, told me I was ruining my life, that I was humiliating her. What were her friends going to think when they found out her daughter was marrying a salesman? My father wasn't happy either, but he tried to be more pragmatic about it. He called me aside and told me that if I was going to marry Samuel, I needed to protect myself financially, that I needed a prenuptial agreement that made it clear that any money or inheritance from the family stayed separate from Samuel. And the way he framed it wasn't like advice from a concerned father. It was like a demand from a CEO protecting his assets. I told my father I wasn't going to ask Samuel to sign a prenup because I wasn't marrying him for money and he wasn't marrying me for money. And that, frankly, I didn't expect to inherit anything from them anyway. My father got serious and told me that if there was no prenup, he and my mother weren't going to attend the wedding, and that he was going to seriously reconsider my benefits as part of the family. I tried to reason with him. I told him this didn't make sense, that Samuel was a good person, that he made me happy, that should be enough. But he just kept saying that I didn't understand the realities of the world, that I was being childish. It got to a point, like 2 weeks after that conversation, where my mother called me and basically gave me an ultimatum. Either I got Samuel to sign the prenup, or they not only wouldn't come to the wedding, but they would cut me off financially from everything. At that point, I was making my own money. I had my job. I shared an apartment with Samuel. I didn't depend on them financially. But it still hurt to hear that. Cassandra obviously was on my mother's side, 100%. She called me one afternoon just to tell me I was an idiot, that I was being selfish, that I was embarrassing the family, and that when everything went to shit with Samuel, not to expect them to rescue me. I talked to Samuel about all this, and he told me that if signing the prenup made my family accept me, he would do it, that he didn't care because he wasn't marrying me for money anyway. But I refused, not because of the prenup itself, but because of the principle, because it was clear my family was never really going to accept him, that they were always going to see him as less, and I wasn't going to start my marriage validating that attitude. So I made a decision. I called my mother and told her that Samuel and I were going to get married, that there wasn't going to be a prenup, and that they were uninvited from the wedding. I could hear my mother breathing hard on the other side of the phone, and then she told me that if that was what I wanted, that was fine, but not to expect any kind of relationship with them after that. I was basically choosing to remove myself from the wreck of him. Family. We got married 6 months later, in spring, in a small, beautiful ceremony with our close friends, some cousins of mine who defied my parents to come, and Samuel's family who welcomed me with open arms from day one. Samuel's mom cried during the whole ceremony. Afterwards, she hugged me and said, "Welcome to the family, Mija," and I felt more loved in that moment than in my entire life with my own family. My father didn't come, my mother didn't come, Cassandra didn't come, and honestly, the day was perfect without them. The first months after the wedding were weird because I kept expecting my family to reach out, that my father at least would call me to apologize or to try to fix things, but nothing happened. Total silence. Cassandra blocked me from all social media. My mother changed her number and didn't give me the new one, and my father simply never responded to any of my messages. Months went by, and eventually I stopped trying. I stopped waiting, and I focused on building my life with Samuel. And I'm not going to lie. The first years were hard financially sometimes because we were building everything from scratch. Samuel was trying to grow in his company and eventually decided to go independent and start his own distribution company, which meant initial investment, risk, sleepless nights worrying about whether we were going to be able to pay all the bills. But we made it. We worked together, we supported each other, and slowly things started to improve. Samuel's company grew. We got good clients. I advanced in my job until I reached a senior position. We bought a small but our own house in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't the mansion I grew up in. We didn't have luxury cars, but it was ours, and we had achieved it together, and that made it 1,000 times more valuable. 5 years went by, 5 complete years without any contact with my parents or Cassandra. I thought about them sometimes, obviously, especially on important dates, on my birthday, at Christmas. But I had made peace with the situation. I had accepted that my family had chosen money and status over me, and that I had chosen love and authenticity over them. And that's how things were. Samuel and I were good. We were happy. We were starting to talk about having kids soon. And life was good. And then, literally 2 weeks ago, on a Tuesday night, I was cooking dinner when my phone rang and I saw a number I didn't recognize, but that had my city's area code. I answered thinking it was someone from work or something, and I heard my mother's voice on the other side. I almost dropped the phone. The first thing she said wasn't, "Hello." It wasn't, "How are you?" It wasn't, "Sorry for not having talked to you in 5 years." No. The first thing she said was, "Isabella, I need you to do me a favor. I need your help with Cassandra." I stayed quiet trying to process what was happening, and my mother kept talking like nothing, like 5 years hadn't passed, like she hadn't basically disowned me. She started telling me that Cassandra, who was now like 26, was in a relationship with a guy named Philip, who came from a super rich family, richer than ours even, and that at first everything seemed perfect, but that now they were discovering that Philip had serious problems. That he had a gambling addiction, that he spent fortunes at casinos, that he drank a lot, that he owed money to dangerous people, and that Cassandra was hooked on him and didn't want to listen to reason. I asked my mother, as calmly as I could, why she was telling me this, what it had to do with me, and she told me she needed me to talk to Cassandra, that I was her older sister, that Cassandra had always admired me even though she never showed it, that maybe I could make her see reason. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I laughed in my mother's face over the phone. I told her, "Mom, you haven't talked to me in 5 years. You cut me out of your life because you didn't approve of my husband. And now, you're calling me because you need something, because your perfect daughter who did choose the rich guy is in trouble and suddenly you remember you have another daughter." My mother was quiet for a moment, and then changed tactics. Started with the emotional thing, saying that she had always loved me, that it had been hard for her too, being without contact, that she had never stopped thinking about me. And I told her that if that were true, she would have picked up the phone at any point in these 5 years, that she would have come to my wedding, that she would have really gotten to know Samuel, that she would have been part of my life. I told her I wasn't going to help her, that Cassandra had made her bed and now had to lie in it, exactly like I had made mine. My mother started getting angry. She told me I was being vindictive, immature, that this was serious, that Cassandra could be in real danger because of this guy's debts. I told her I was sorry, but it wasn't my problem, and I hung up. I stood there in the kitchen with the phone in my hand shaking, and Samuel came out of his office because he had heard part of the conversation and asked me what had happened. I told him everything, and he just hugged me and told me I had done the right thing, that I didn't owe them anything, that I didn't have to let them back into my life just because they needed me now. I thought that was the end of it. But 2 days later, I got a call from my father. Douglas sounded tired, old, not like I remembered him. He said, "Isabella, we need to talk." And I told him, no, we didn't need to talk. That he had made it very clear 5 years ago what he thought of my decisions. My father sighed and told me he regretted it, that it had been a mistake to cut contact with me, that he had always been proud of me, even though he didn't show it. I told him it was very convenient that he regretted it just now, that he needed me for something. But my father kept talking, and he told me details my mother hadn't told me. He told me that Cassandra's boyfriend, Philip, didn't just have gambling debts, but that he had convinced Cassandra to lend him money, a lot of money, supposedly for investments, but that had really gone straight to the casinos. And Cassandra had taken that money from family funds, from accounts my father had given her access to, and we were talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. That Philip had also borrowed money in my father's name without his knowledge, using company information, and that now there were people calling to collect debts my father didn't know existed. I told my father that sounded horrible, but it still wasn't my problem. That I didn't have money to lend them even if I wanted to. That Samuel and I were doing well, but we weren't rich. My father told me he wasn't asking me for money. He was asking me to talk to Cassandra, to help her see that she needed to get away from Philip before he completely destroyed her life. And I told him, "Dad, do you remember when you told me you would seriously reconsider my benefits as part of the family if I married Samuel? Do you remember when you told me I was being childish because I didn't want a prenup? Well, maybe it's time for you to use that same energy with Cassandra. Maybe it's time for you to cut off her access to money, to force her to take responsibility for her decisions, exactly like you did with me." My father went quiet and I kept going. I told him that the difference was that when I made my decision, it was for love. It was to build a life with someone who valued me for who I was, not for my last name or my bank account. That Cassandra had made her decisions out of greed, to maintain a lifestyle, to be with someone who supposedly had more money than us, and that now she was paying the consequences. I told him that when I needed support, when I needed my family to believe in me, you turned your backs on me, and now that Cassandra needs support, you expect me to run and help, like nothing happened. My father tried to interrupt me, but I didn't let him. I told him everything I had kept inside for 5 years. I told him I had missed having them in my life, that it had deeply hurt me that they weren't at my wedding, that there had been moments when I would have wanted to call them and share good news or ask for advice, but that they had closed that door, not me. That I had extended my hand, that I had tried to include Samuel in the family, that I had done everything possible to maintain the relationship, but that in the end they chose money over me. And I told him that now that money was causing problems, now that his perfect daughter, who had done everything right, according to their standards, was in crisis, suddenly I was good enough to help. My father told me I was right, that they had been unfair, that he genuinely regretted it. I told him I appreciated the apology, but it was too late, that I wasn't going to get involved in Cassandra's drama, and that I wished them the best, but my life was fine without them in it. My father made one last attempt. He told me this wasn't just about Cassandra. It was about family, that eventually Samuel and I might have children, and those kids deserved to know their grandparents. I told him that my children, when I had them, deserved to be surrounded by people who showed unconditional love, not love based on how much money you had or who you married, and that as far as I was concerned, Samuel's family were the only grandparents my future children needed. I hung up that call and felt weird, a mix of angry and sad and relieved all at the same time. Samuel found me crying on the couch and let me get it all out. Let me say everything I felt without trying to fix it. He was just there. And after a while, he told me he was proud of me, that I had handled the situation with more grace than they deserved, and that no matter what happened, he was always going to be on my side. I thought after that it was really going to end, but yesterday, literally yesterday, I got another call. This time it was my mother again, and she was furious. She yelled at me, told me I was a bad sister, a bad daughter. How could I be so cold and cruel when Cassandra needed me? That Philip had disappeared with more money, that Cassandra was devastated, that everything was a disaster, and that it was my fault for not having helped when they asked me. I told my mother that none of this was my fault, that I hadn't created this problem and it wasn't my responsibility to fix it, that if she had raised Cassandra to value money over everything else, this was the natural result of that upbringing. My mother said horrible things to me. She told me I had always been selfish, that I thought I was better than them, that I was happy about Cassandra's misfortunes. I told her I wasn't happy, but I wasn't going to pretend to be surprised either, that when you base your whole life on the pursuit of money and status, eventually that's going to blow up in your face. And I told her one last thing before hanging up. I told her that I had found real happiness, that my marriage was solid, that I had peace in my life, and that none of that had to do with how much money we had in the bank, but with the fact that Samuel and I had chosen each other for the right reasons. That they could keep living in their world of appearances and materialism, but that I had gotten out of there and had no intention of going back. After hanging up, I blocked my mother and father's numbers. Not with anger, more with a feeling of closing a chapter definitively. Samuel got home that night and I told him everything, and he told me he completely supported me, that if I ever wanted to reconnect with them in the future, he would be there, but that he also understood if I never wanted to see them again. The thing is that now, sitting here reflecting on everything, I realize I'm not really angry. I'm at peace. I made difficult decisions 5 years ago, and those decisions gave me the life I have now, a life I love, with a person who loves me for who I am, not for what I can give him or for my last name. Cassandra made her own decisions. She valued the things my mother taught her to value, and now she's living the consequences of those choices. It doesn't give me pleasure to see my sister suffer, but I also don't feel like it's my job to rescue her, especially after how she treated me. Samuel and I are seriously talking about starting to try to have a baby next year. We have a nice house, stable, jobs we like, a solid relationship. And yes, we don't have the fortune my family has, we don't live in a mansion, we're not going to inherit a construction empire, but we have something worth more than all that. We have real love, mutual respect, and the freedom to be ourselves without having to prove anything to anyone. And when I have children, they're going to grow up seeing a model of marriage based on love and respect, not on financial transactions and appearances. They're going to learn that a person's value isn't in their bank account but in their character, and they're going to be surrounded by people who love them unconditionally, even if those people aren't technically their blood family. Last week, I went to dinner with Samuel's parents, who have basically adopted me as their own daughter. Samuel's mom showed me pictures of when he was little, told me stories about how the three of them worked together, the father, the mother, and Samuel, to be able to pay for his studies, how sometimes they ate rice and beans for weeks to save, but how they were always happy because they had each other. And I realized that that's what I want. That's what I chose. A family that's sustained by love and joint effort, not by bank accounts and exclusive clubs. I don't know what's going to happen with Cassandra. Honestly, I hope she finds a way out of this situation, that she learns something from this whole experience. But I know it's not my responsibility to save her. And as for my parents, maybe someday, years in the future, there can be some kind of reconciliation, but only if it's genuine, only if they truly understand what they did wrong and are willing to accept my life and my decisions. But if that never happens, I'm okay with that too. I've built my own family, one that chose me and that I chose, and that's enough.